I was never someone who was chosen first for sports. In fact, I was almost always chosen dead last. Physical coordination was never really my thing, and my peers knew it. I was a sedentary kid, much more prone to books and theater than sports and playing. And yet, despite my own self-awareness, getting chosen last always stung. I remember one specific encounter when we started a badminton unit in PE, yes, badminton, Jewish private school, and I thought to myself, yes, badminton I can do. I used to play, after all, in my grandparents' backyard. But inevitably, my assigned partner, a cooler kid, Jason, saw that we were a paired team, sighed, walked over to me and said, "Do you think maybe you could just try?" I was dejected. I always tried, and yet I knew, no matter what, I was never going to be anyone's first choice in PE. At that point in my life, I directly correlated being chosen to being important or being useful, and it was only through being chosen that I felt empowered to be able to try. When we're chosen by others, we're inherently told that we matter, that we're significant, and most importantly, we're being given an opportunity. However, sometimes being chosen can make us feel too important, too superior to others. If we're chosen over and over and over again, perhaps we take it for granted that we are simply the best choice. Recognizing that chosenness can have such power over our interactions with others begs the question, how do we unpack all that it means to be chosen by God? This week in Torah, as Moses continues to remind the Israelite people the commitments they have made in order to enter the land, Moses also reminds the people of their chosenness, but in a context that feels a little odd and unexpected. Bear with me. Moses says, "You are children of the eternal your God. You shall not gash yourselves or shave the front of your heads because of the dead, for you are a people consecrated to the eternal your God. The eternal your God chose you from among all other peoples on earth to be the treasured one. You shall not eat anything abhorrent." Okay, on the surface level, this idea of chosenness is placed in between two commandments that make us separate from other people. This first one, lo titgodedu, do not gash yourself because of the dead. This instruction is to remind the Israelites not to take on foreign mourning rituals, such as gashing or shaving, which were common amongst others in the ancient Near East. Then the idea of chosenness is followed by the instruction of kashrut. Lo tochal kol to'eva, don't eat anything abhorrent. Once again, a reminder to the people not to eat the same foods as their neighbors who don't keep kosher. This seems simple enough, but when we look deeper, we find just a little bit more. The rabbis look at that first verse, lo titgodedu, do not gash yourselves, and note that the word titgodedu does not simply mean to cut oneself, but can also mean to cut oneself off from the community. Midrash and Talmud both note that this verse has a double meaning, telling us not to form numerous factions, but rather to stay united as one people, so as not to become many disparate groups acting in different ways. The parallel verse about kashrut illuminates a further idea about community. Medieval commentator Rashi explains that here God labels certain foods as to'eva, or abominable, not because those foods are inherently bad, but because they are abominable for us as Jews to eat. With this comment, Rashi does away with this idea that kashrut might exist for health, and he shows us that kashrut exists to keep our people together. When we eat together, we practice together, we believe the same things, we stay united. When we eat with our neighbors, back then, we learned their problematic practices and began to take them on for ourselves. Legally and historically, this made sense for a new people entering a new land who needed guidelines to remain united. The Israelites hadn't exactly shown themselves to be trustworthy or steadfast to God up until this point. Their chosenness was tied to their ethical monotheism, their ability to follow certain laws and practices that distinguished them from other idol-worshiping neighbors. But what about for us, modern Reformed Jews? Much of this idea of separating ourselves from other communities feels at odds with how we've chosen to live in the world. We live amongst Jews and non-Jews. Some of our children even marry outside of our tradition, and many of us are not practicing a strict form of kashrut. I regularly break bread with the United Methodist pastor up the street, and not once have I thought that our happy hours will make me a Methodist. So how then do we understand this idea of chosenness, presented to us as separate from, in a world where we have chosen to blend in? For many of us, this extremely particular idea of being chosen is not only foreign, but it also makes us a little bit uncomfortable. Knowing we're chosen to play dodgeball is one thing. Knowing we're chosen by God is another thing altogether. There are some Jews who have done away with the theology of chosenness completely. For example, founder of the Reconstructionist movement, Mordecai Kaplan, loathed the idea of chosenness and the ways that it manifested itself within the Jewish community. In his seminal work, Judaism as a Civilization, Kaplan says, "The idea of race or national superiority exercises divisive influences, generating suspicion and hatred. We cannot assume that Israel, the people of Israel, must at all times possess that spirit to a higher degree than other people. Thank God," he says, "that I had the courage to go through with the excision of such a cancerous growth from the Jewish consciousness." Very strongly worded. Similarly, theologian Marcia Falk raises a feminist critique of chosenness. She explains that chosenness seems to fly in the face of monotheistic belief that all humanity is created in the divine image, and hence all humanity is equally loved and valued by God. She says, "I find it difficult to conceive of a feminist Judaism that would incorporate in it this teaching, the valuing of one people over another. It's all too analogous to the privileging of one sex over another." And yet, while we do tend to lean a little bit more universal than particular, Reformed Judaism has not altogether done away with chosenness. In the Aleinu prayer, which we will recite together in just a few moments, we say, "Let us proclaim the greatness of the Creator, who has set us apart from the other families of the earth, giving us a destiny unique among the nations." I think we can best understand the Reform approach to chosenness by looking at the 1976 Reform platform adopted by our movement called a centenary perspective. It says, "Judaism emphasizes action rather than creed as the primary expression of a religious life, the means by which we strive to achieve universal justice and peace. Reform Judaism shares this emphasis of duty and obligation. Our founders stressed that the Jews' ethical responsibilities, personal and social, are enjoined by God. The past century has taught us that the claims made upon us may begin with our ethical obligations, but they also extend to many other aspects of Jewish living, including creating a Jewish home, keeping the Sabbath and the holy days, and other activities which promote the survival of the Jewish people and enhance its existence." So in Reform practice, chosenness isn't about something we get, and it isn't about being separate from or better than others. Instead, chosenness is about what we get to do. We're chosen to accept upon ourselves the obligations of an ethical monotheism as they exist in a 21st century world, not to distance ourselves from what might keep us from others, but to focus on what's uniquely ours, the practices that stem from personal and social ethical responsibility. We get to build vibrant Jewish communities. We get to raise children who love Judaism and their neighbors. We get to fight for the widow, the orphan, and the stranger, and we get to make the world a better place. I really won't ever fully resonate with this idea that chosenness makes us somehow better, stronger, different. Instead, chosenness for me creates an obligation. Not you are special, but instead you are responsible. We no longer need the chosenness of our ancient world to separate us from those who may eat and practice differently from us. We know exactly who we are. Instead, we need a chosenness that empowers us to show up again and again and choose a Judaism that is uniquely ours. So as we move through these next few weeks, we're heading towards the days of awe. I'd like to ask us all to sit with a different question than the one that I carried around gym class all of those years ago. Not, am I good enough to be chosen? But instead, knowing that you already are, what will you do with it? Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom.